Hello and welcome to another episode of The Way I See It. Remember to please click subscribe down below, or the subscribe button will come up right here in the bottom left-hand corner here. Should have already come up if you're watching this on the computer, even if you're watching it on a mobile device, but that button doesn't work on a mobile device. You actually have to scroll under the video to click subscribe. But on a computer, it does work. It's actually a button. You can click it and subscribe to my channel. Remember, the point of my videos, I've discussed several current events recently, but I'm getting back into some biblical concepts, and it's really to help strengthen your biblical worldview. So even if I'm discussing current events, I'm trying to take a biblical worldview towards it and talk about how a Reformed Christian, Zennial, would see that, or how I think one should see it based on my knowledge of the Bible, the way I see it, thus the name of the channel. So today, I'm talking about thinking about the end. And I may have done something like this before. I know that there's some videos I'm going to link to underneath, and I'll put them up here at the end of the video to, how you get that end screen, but I'll link them underneath too in the description. I've done one talking about hell, and I've done one talking about eschatology, which is like, the end times and how you think it's going to end. But that's not really what I'm talking about specifically. I'm not getting into all that today. I'm really talking about thinking about the end. And the reason I thought of this is because I don't think we do this enough in our society, even in our churches today. Even though as Christians we believe in heaven or in hell, or some Christians don't believe in hell, but I'm like, whatever. We don't think about that, and we really think more about heaven on earth, God's kingdom come, God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven, and we think about just how to kind of bring about God's kingdom on earth, which we can't do, right? The Bible doesn't say that we actually can do that. Kingdom work, that idea, kingdom work, that's like something we made up. We live in obedience to God, and we're being made into the image of Christ. We're sharing the gospel, but God is building the kingdom. Christ is building his church, and one day there's an end point. There's something that's going to happen, and I talked about it in my previous video about theocracy, where we're going to be with God in person. But I think the reason we don't really talk about it much or think about it much is because in our society now, and this is specific to like Western culture, America, these countries that have a lot of medical advancements in place and ways to deal with death and avoid death and live longer. If you go into other places, other countries, they might not need to hear a video like this because they're seeing death every day. They're thinking about death. We aren't, and we try to avoid it because we're like, well, that's such a buzzkill, and that's just depressing, and God doesn't want me to think about that. And that's not right. God does want us to think about it. See, for the last about 100 years, it's gotten to where most children live beyond the age of 5. It used to be that about 1 out of every 4 children died at or before age of 5 because we didn't have all the vaccines we have now. See, because of all these vaccines, kids most likely are going to make it past age 5. People used to die in their homes quite more often than they do now. Whereas nowadays, when folks, especially because everybody's living a lot longer, they go into nursing homes, they die in the hospital, they're out of sight, and there's like maybe a few family members gathered around when they die. Some die in their homes, but it's not common part of our life like it used to be. And so I think that's why we don't think about it. The reason I thought we should do this video and why we should think about it is because even though we think we can manage death, we know we can't. The pandemic has taught us that. People are dropping dead from COVID. Some people are having adverse reactions to the vaccine. I'm not sure if I'm going to go a little bit into that tinfoil hat area here. A lot of folks are anti-vaccine, not in general, but specifically to COVID because they think that it is more dangerous and it's having more adverse effects than all the other vaccines are. I'm not sure if that's true or if we're just hearing more about it because people are more wary about it. And so they're all wary, and every time somebody hears that somebody had an adverse reaction to the vaccine or died from it, they're like, see. And no one's posting about adverse reactions to other vaccines because people are just like, oh yeah, they're safe. We've been taking them for years. That's just my little thing about that. I'm not sure. I'm not anti-vax. I'm not necessarily pro-vax like I am pro, polio vaccine or pro-measles vaccine. I feel like with COVID, you should treat it like the flu vaccine. I think people should take it if they want to and not be forced to. But coming back from that, people are very wary of dying from either COVID or from the vaccine. And then with the unrest that's been happening in like Afghanistan, that's when you see people start to talk about, hey, we don't know what real persecution is. Look at those people. Or you don't know what it is to really suffer. Look at those people. But the fact is, we could all suffer at any moment, at any day. James 4:14 says, why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Right before that, he was saying, now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. You don't even know a pandemic may hit, and then travel will be shut down, and you can't go to that city, and you can't do those things you want to do. But he says, basically, you don't know what's going to happen. You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes, right? We assume we're going to live to be 75, 80, 85, 90. It might be tragic if I get cancer, but maybe at least I'll have a couple of years to try to conquer it. Or if I realize I'm not going to conquer it, I'll be able to prepare my family and say goodbye. But I could die before I edit this video and put it on YouTube, in a car wreck. And I don't want to teach my children necessarily to be afraid to live their life because they could die at any moment from anything. But the fact is, we could die at any moment from anything. God decides that. You might die of COVID. You might not ever get COVID. You might die of the vaccine. You might not. You might live to be 90, 95. Everybody you love might die before you. But none of us knows that, and we need to stop living our lives like we can control death and we can avoid death, and like we don't want to think about it because somehow we're not going to be as pleasing to God. I think we're going to do better work for God if we're thinking about things like that. Another verse I like that I want to read is Ecclesiastes 7, verse 2. I first heard this verse when I went to a funeral for a baby that was born with a genetic problem, and they didn't know if she'd even be born alive. And then as soon as she was born, it was like, we don't know how long she's going to live. Well, she ended up living 4.5 days. And I went to that funeral, and the pastor who was doing the funeral read this verse from Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 2. And it says, it is better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting, for death is the destiny of everyone. The living should take this to heart. And why is it better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting? Well, when you're at a party, everybody's just thinking about the here and now, man, living it up and having a good time. When you go to a house of mourning, everybody's thinking about their future. Everyone's thinking about either the worth of that person's life who died, or they're reflecting on their own life and the value that they have added to the world. And maybe they're thinking, man, I need to straighten up and fly right. Think about what you're doing with your life, right? That's the point of that verse. Think about what you're doing with your life. And a house of mourning causes you to think about that. You don't think about that in a house of feasting. So this isn't necessarily a video to try to get you to think about I'm not giving you what to think about necessarily. I'm not going to give you a bunch of scriptures again about eschatology or whatever. You can watch other videos about that. You can do your own studying. This is more to get you to start that process. The other verse I want to read, the final verse here, is Revelation from chapter 1, verse 3, where John writes, "Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear it, and take to heart what is written in it, because the time is near." So don't be afraid of the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation says you need to read it aloud and hear it. You're blessed if you read it, and you're blessed if you hear it. So study it. There's plenty that Paul wrote and that the other apostles wrote. Jesus talked about the end and what it's going to be like. You've got to spend time thinking about that. Be sober-minded and teach your children. That's another thing. I think I'm going to prep my daughter before the second vaccine. Like, we've taken the first dose and we're going back for the second dose in a few weeks. And I mean, I don't know. I've never been scared of vaccines before, but now suddenly I'm kind of scared. Like, what if I die from the second injection? Should I not get it? No, I really want to participate in the things that I need to get it for. Ultimately, God is in charge of my life, not me, and whether or not I get this vaccine or not. But I kind of start to think maybe I should start talking, at least to my oldest daughter, a little more often about what happens if I die? What happens if your daddy dies? What happens if one of your siblings dies? I don't necessarily need to talk to her about what happens if she dies. If it's sudden, like, there's no way to prepare for that, and it's not like it would have changed her mind anyway, but I guess I could, if we find out she's sick or something, we could have the what if you die discussion. But I kind of want someone to not be as devastated as they would be by my death, because they know that death is the end of everyone and the living should take this to heart, right? Like, whether you die tomorrow and it's horrible and your children need you and they miss you, or whether you die at a very, very old age after you've lived a long, wonderful, full life, death is the end of everyone. And I don't want my children to be depressed thinking about death all the time, but I don't want them to live as if it's never going to happen and then be shocked when it does, you know? So, you know, these are discussions that you need to have. You need to think about for yourself, and you need to have it with your children. Again, not harping on it, not like every night at bedtime, let's talk about what happens if we die. Your children will be miserable. I mean, they'll be having nightmares if you do that. But it's not something that you should be afraid to broach at all. So that's kind of my point. That's my episode, my video today, was to talk about the fact that we need to think about death. And we talk about what's going on in Afghanistan. I've shown my daughter the video of the person handing their toddler up over the fence to the soldiers. And I'm like, these parents are willing to be separated from their children for the rest of their lives, thinking their child is going to have a better life with other parents in another country than with them in that country. It's something to teach them that, like, not everything is beautiful in this life, and not everything is perfect, and not every one of your dreams is going to be met. And what does it look like to be a Christian in that? What does it look like to be fulfilled in Christ if every one of your material dreams is not fulfilled? If every one of your dreams of traveling is not fulfilled? If you don't live to be a really old person, or your parents don't live to be really old people? What does it look like to be fulfilled in Christ through suffering, through hardship, through possibly early death? So that's my woohoo cheery episode today on thinking about death and looking ahead to it in light of, and living our lives in light of that's the end for everyone. Unless Jesus comes back before you die. That's always my hope. Everything that happens that's bad, I'm like, maybe Jesus is going to come back really soon. So please remember to like this video. I hope you can share it with some friends. Please subscribe and encourage other folks to subscribe. Leave me comments. I always respond to the comments. Everybody who ever leaves me a comment, I always, respond back. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see y'all later.